quite as full as it was before, but nevertheless, good afternoon. Those of you who were not at the previous sessions, those of you who were at the previous sessions, welcome back. Wait and see what new disaster befalls me between now and the time the music starts. Okay, so what I'm going to do, this is very much hands-on, so I'm going to switch between the presentation and live demo. So I'm going to step through various things you can do in 2010 to build a SharePoint-based dashboard, different sorts. And the first question I need to ask you, because it's interactive, it's a talk, who has never, ever used Visio in this room? That's good. So that saves me some of the backgrounding stuff. Welcome to the late arrivals.
Thank you.
You missed all the excitement of me having to go between there and there.
So now I'm finally in the right place.
It's a place.
Expected to be.
It's a place, whether it's the right place or not. It's a very philosophical question. Okay, so some basic introduction to the tool, talk about some of the new facilities of Visio Services, and then my 10 steps and a wrap up, and then alcohol is at the end of this presentation, you'll be pleased to know. I did ask you if you had ever used, or if you'd never used Visio, and nobody put their hands up, so you've all used it at some point in time. And that's very important because it's very easy to undervalue people's prior knowledge. And in fact, even though if you have not even used a recent version of Visio, you will have some knowledge, and the things I'll show you will be hopefully familiar. And what we've done is we've enhanced the product. But whenever you're building a dashboard, we need to think about what people actually need to see. And the interesting thing about this is that it's very easy to sort of connect data and publish it, and it turns it, we call it in English as an expression, into an explosion in a paint factory. It can be very easy to either overwhelm people or actually give them the wrong information that they don't actually really want to know. So dashboards are great, but you really have to think about what it is that you're dashboarding. And sometimes it's very easy to dashboard the obvious information, but it's not the obvious information that people want to see because it's obvious. You want to find the things that are more subtle in it, whether it be trends, whether it be exceptions, those are the sorts of things. And that's really about understanding the data as much as about understanding the tools. So I think that's really, really important. So that's what I thought about it. I said, well, okay, so what is a dashboard? So I went off to our favourite sort of internet tooling, spelling.com, to see what definitions I could find. This is not Wikipedia. It's a fascia, sometimes an instrument panel in a car, a boat, or an aircraft. Interesting enough, the obsolete meaning is a board at the side of a carriage or boat to protect against splashing. So to stop you getting splashed by all the mud. And then, more importantly, the third one, a document presenting the most significant information about a single subject, about a subject on a single page. Single page being the object here. If you start having to go into multiple pages for a dashboard, the probability is it's not the right dashboard that you're designing. So you have to really think about how you can encapsulate the information you want to present in a single place. Do you have Visio or SharePoint? Well, have you got the right versions? Now this is actually quite important. Some of you may have Visio installed, but you may have only the standard version. In order to take advantage of the dashboarding, you need to have either the professional or the premium version. This is actually a snapshot from my Visio over here, just showing you that it's telling me that I've got the premium version, mainly because Microsoft doesn't make us pay for the expensive version. I get that as part of what I do. But if you're not sure, go check. Remember, it doesn't have to be premium, it can be the professional version as well, but it is important that it's either of them. The way that I sort of differentiate it internally I think of Visio Standard as Visio Standalone. It doesn't connect to stuff. In the same way, if you think of Microsoft Project, you've got Microsoft Project Standard and Microsoft Project Professional. Standard don't connect to stuff. Professional connects to servers. If you think about that as a simple delineation, it's quite easy to make sure that you don't screw up. It's not any old SharePoint server. Visio Services, if you wish to use Visio Services, is something that's only available, and not necessarily enabled, on SharePoint Enterprise. So if you're connecting to a server, you need to ensure that it's an enterprise server and that it has Visio Services enabled. There's something else on this screen which is unofficial, but you'll find lots of people inside Microsoft run Windows 64-bit operating systems, or in my case, Windows Server 64-bit operating systems. But you'll practically, almost, but quite a lot, you'll only see the 32-bit versions of the Office suite installed. We tend not to put the 64-bit in unless we really need to, because we've got huge models in Excel or huge graphics that we're trying to do inside the graphics packages. So it's not unusual, because a lot of the connectors are only compiled for 32 bits and stuff like that, and you can run into unexpected problems. So you're not obliged, which some people think you are, if you have a 64-bit operating system to put in 64-bit Office. Not the case. You can put in 32-bit, no issues at all. You probably all know that already, but it's worthwhile pointing out. Okay, so we checked the version of Visio we had, which I'll move on to step 2. Show me the data. Not quite the same as showing the money, but the general thought process is the same. First question, have you got it locally or have you got it on the server? Now, that may sound like, well, that's a very straightforward question. But the reality is that Visio can maintain its connection to server-based data even once you've published the diagram. So as the data changes, Visio will update with it without having to relaunch the client. We'll look at that as we move on in the steps. So whether or not you start off with the data as a spreadsheet or as a local access file, you need to think about whether you need to move that onto the server so that as the data changes, so your diagrams will change. This basically just talks about the different sorts of data we can connect to. In the middle there, Excel. What will we do with Excel? Lots of connections through to Excel. But obviously things like SQL, OADB, OADB, ODBC, SharePoint list, whatever. We can connect to all of those. It's all part of the standard connectivity. Is our data process data or analytical data? I.e., are we monitoring process steps to see how they're going? Or are we trying to show maybe averages over a period of time for some revenue data or something like that? And you need to sort of think about that, because sometimes you need to do work in the data before you bring it into Visio to ensure that, although Visio is incredibly powerful and can do calculations within it, you might want to say, well, I don't really want to do calculations inside Visio. I'd rather do them in the as a SQL statement or within some other form, create a field, which is a virtual field, with the calculation in it. Why worry? Well, it's all about performance. And of course, you always want to optimize these things so there's the least amount of work, or the work is done in the most efficient place. So I'm going to jump now into Visio. Here we go. It's a... No. I'm going to push a button. It's very dangerous, I know, but here we go. Really do what I wanted to do. There you go. A little bit better. We've got, in the premium version, there are 66 different templates. There's about 60 in the professional version. they do all sorts of different things. Business graphics. Let's go back. Let's look at another one. Network analysis. All sorts of different pieces. But for the purpose of the demo that I'm about to do, we'll just go to some basic process. So what we'll do is we'll go back here. We'll go to a flowchart and we'll do a basic flowchart. Now, some of you may be using 2010, some of you haven't. Who's not using the 2010 version of Visio? Everybody else using 2010? Okay. So some of you will probably have seen the feature that I'm about to show. Some of you may not. Depending on what templates you're using, when I draw an object on the page, I can now get it to draw additional objects and connect them without me having to drag them and connect them. Anybody not aware of that? Are you alive? You nod. It's okay, you don't have to speak. Okay, so we'll just deal with those two objects for the moment. There's a key piece of information here. It's not mandatory, but for you guys it's going to be really, really useful. Something that you probably haven't got switched on in your version of Visio, but I've got switched on in mine. Why is it important? Well, it's this one here, developer. So most of you probably haven't got this switched on. Let me just show you where you switch it on. We'll go into File, Options, and then into Advanced. And then we've got a zillion of options here, and right at the very bottom is Run in Developer Mode. Okay? Everybody, whether you've got Standard, Professional or Premium, have Developer as a tool. So available to you. Why is that important? Well, it's going to give you some insight into these shapes. I don't need to use it, but I'm going to use it. So let me just get rid of, just have one shape for ease of demonstration purposes. We have this thing here called Show Shape Sheet in the Developer tab. Okay, this is going to be a bit of a shock when I switch it on. So down here, what you can see are all the attributes of that single shape. Okay, that's just one shape, one set of attributes, and I haven't connected any data to it yet. This means that every shape, look at this one here. We can see that we've got things that look very much like Excel type commands built into it, because we have got Excel type commands built into it. We can use Visual Basic, we can use the API outside to program these things, we can program logic into it, into any aspect of it. A simple one that I demonstrate. So if we just zoom in on this a bit. So let's just move up to the top here. So if we take this shape, I can stretch it and I can highlight it like that, but let's just move it back to here. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to be, this is a formula, and I'm going to say that equals 2 times the width. So now, as I change the width, so it changes in shape. Incredibly simple. But all you already should be saying, oh wow, this is quite interesting what we could do here. Because anything is programmable inside Visio. That's just an object, but you can either the page that I'm on or the whole document. So it is very much more like Excel, because each of these shapes is more like cell than it is like a graphic in, say, PowerPoint. Okay. So I'm just going to just take out that. We'll put that back to a. So So now it's back to the way it was previously. That's okay. Let's now go back. Let's switch off the developer tab. Data. I did say that we can connect data easily. And if you've got Professional, Premium, you will see this data tab. If you've only got Standard, you won't see it. It's not there. So it's very simple to decide what data I want to have on here. If I look at this data, we have, I think, a shape data window. Here we have some preset data objects associated with this shape. So call that 1, call that 22, own that Ian, function start date, pick that up here, end date, won't have that one, status, do we have anything? Yes, in progress. So that object has data associated with it now automatically, because this shape has been programmed to have them. And we can essentially look at the defined shape data, and here we can see those fields that have been defined to go with that shape. And notice that we can do all sorts of interesting things that we can, here's an ask on drop. So I can program the shape in the window that when I pop it on the drawing page, it will prompt me to fill in that data. Incredibly powerful. These are hidden features that most people just don't know about. Okay, let me just see where we were on here. Okay, so for the demonstration purposes, we're going to go to that well-known company called Contoso. You may have heard of Contoso. It's been around for a while. It's very successful. It sells grapefruit. Most people don't know that. The world's biggest supplier of grapefruit. That's a lie, but it just made it up as I'm going along. Just see if you're paying attention. So that's where we're going to get data from. So let's just move back to the presentation. So, wizards. The wonderful world of Harry Potter. Interestingly, that was filmed about 3 kilometres from where I live, and they're just opening up as an attraction this summer. You can go and visit the Diagonal Alley and stuff like that. It's very exciting. So, organise your data, understand where your keys are, and let Visio do the hard work. Now, I've seen a number of issues with data where we end up in all sorts of interesting problems. Let's just go back to the Explorer. Let's go back to Contoso. Let's pick out the approval metrics. Now, this is fine, but often you'll see spreadsheets that look something like this. So we'll have here UK, and then we'll join those things together and we'll merge them. Merchant Center. Oops. And then maybe we'll make this France, and we'll make this France optimum as well. Now, at this point in time, if I was to connect this as it is into Visio, it wouldn't see any difference between the optimum in column E and the optimum in column F. Because as far as it's concerned, the columns will be the same names, because you only can choose one row as your column names. And effectively then what we've got, if you think of each row as a record, then we've got duplicate field names. So one of the first things you have to do, as I have been through this in great pain inside Microsoft, is look at these wonderful spreadsheets that people present you and say, hey, turn that into a dashboard, is to, have I got unique field names across all my data? Because if I don't, I'm going to run into problems. What you can do in Excel is great, because the real column names, of course, are the columns at the top. Everything else is just an analog. But once you take that data into another environment, it's not the same thing. So I'm just going to move that back to here, to where it was. There we go. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect using the link data to shapes. Here's my wizard kicking off. And here you can see those data sources that I talked about earlier. And we've got a number of those. I'm going to be using the Excel one for the demonstration purposes. But you can imagine that pretty well with OLADB and ODBC, you can connect to anything at all. There's no restrictions. Whether or not you want to go through those technologies, which can be quite slow, if you're connecting to a very large source of data, that's another issue. You might want to bring it in somewhere else to stage it before you analyze it. So we're going to choose where our data is coming from. And we're going to use approval metrics. If we've got multiple sheets, we can choose them. If we want to select specific columns of data, we can do so. Choose our key. We're going to use stage as the key. And then we're going to finish. And so what you can see now is not embedded data. This is not embedded, this is linked. If the data changes, so based upon whatever refresh cycle you set for the data element here inside Visio, this will change as well. Back to Harry. So, organising your data, sense of making sure that your columns are unique. Understanding what you want to use as your principal key is very important. And then, as you saw, literally seconds to make the connection between Visio and the data. Incredibly straightforward. So moving on from Harry. I suppose in Finland he would be Harry Potter as opposed to Harry Potter.
Indeed.
That's a Finnish joke. It was not very funny, but it's the best one to think of at the time. Okay, so now the question really is, how do we want to display the data? And we've got an incredibly powerful tool which I'm just about to show you that allows us to be incredibly varied in the way that we display the data. So let's go back and have a look at what I mean by that. Currently we have a shape here, and we have some information here. And let's say that this is process number, or let's call this process, actually what's the name of this? Let's get them right. This is going to be called inbound application. Now I only did that so that later on you'll see the reason why, but that's we're going to use that as a way of matching one to the other. Now I can link the data very straightforward. I just drop that over there. And so now you can see over here I have a connection symbol. It tells me that I've connected it. And lo and behold, some of the information from here is already being displayed up in the shape. And that's what we call data graphics. Now, the default out of the box in this, and you can preset them over here in the template, but the default here out of the box isn't the most exciting or useful that I want to see, because I've already got the name, the inbound application there. So I'm going to go into here, or I'll go up here, data graphics, and I can edit the data graphic. So for example, I don't want to show the stage, so I'll delete it. And I do want to show the current, which is the current value. And what I want to do is I want to show it in the top right hand corner. So what I'm going to do is edit that. And what we'll do is we'll simply we'll take out the label. We don't need the label. Not shown. We don't want to have a border. It's not necessary. And the way we want to position that is on the right edge at the top. We'll just see how that goes. We want it inside. So we probably want to the value format. There we go. So I can basically, I can actually manually position it as well, but I try to use the automated one as much as possible. Let's show the optimum now. So I'll put the optimum in the left-hand corner. So I'm going to go back into data graphics. I'm going to edit the data graphic, and I'm going to add a new item, and I'll add in the optimum, and we'll do that as text again, and we'll say yes, label position not shown, then we'll do none, and then we're going to put this into the left and top. That wasn't very good. Right, so keep going out so we get it right. A bit boring, I know. Okay. I'm going to. It's because of the size of the default box it creates, but we'll put it there. So we've got a degree of control over where these things actually land. So far so good. We've done some interesting information with the optimum and the current. Let's look at the utilization here. So utilization, I don't really want to show as a number. I want some other way of showing it. And so the way that I'm going to do that is add that again as a data graphic, but this time, oops, I'm going to pick up the utilization, but I don't want to show it as text. I'm going to show it as a data bar, and I can show it as a progress bar, various other ways of doing it. I'm going to do it as a speedometer, and what we'll do is we're going to put that at the bottom edge on the right, and OK, there it is. So that's now showing us the fact that that is 0.4, but the reality is that's, again, I would like to have that about there, and I want to do edit data graphics, and then what we want to do is just change this slightly. I don't want to show the label again, and I want to show that the maximum value is 1, and that the value format is a percentage. So what we can see is we've got many different ways of showing the data. So the beautiful thing about this is now that I could, for example, just create another box here. If I call this application triage, or even triage, interesting. Anyhow, if I connect the data to it, so it remembers to some extent the graphics, and it's going to push them out to me. What I would actually do is make this my master, which would probably be the better way of doing it, and put it in my template over here. But notice, if you may, over here where I have my shape data, not only have I got that data that I manually put in before, all the other data elements that I've connected to have now become part of the data set. And if I go back to the if I go back to my developer window and I look at my item here and I show the shape, what we're going to see is somewhere should be the data associated with that item, shape data. There it is. It was. So here we can see all that data that's been connected, and if you were using the API as a developer, you can start to do things. You can push and pull data backwards and forwards from it. So you can see pretty impressive in terms of the programmability of the shapes. Again, let's switch that off. Right. So what I'm going to do now is close this one and open so here is that same process that's been filled out and a bit more, and what we can see now is if I do the same connection, so let's link the data to the shapes. We'll just do the same one as we did previously. And then what I can do is I can do automatically link and what you can see is in this case, well, it's not terribly pretty, all the different stages have linked because the stage names match, or the shape names or whatever you wanted to put in there match the names here in the table. I don't have to go and drag them on each time that I want to do it. Okay, is that clear? Right, let's move back to the presentation. So, very powerful, very easy to use. But as you saw, we had both simple text displays and we had progress bars, but we've got icons, so we can do all different sets of icons, and we can do all sorts of things based upon what sort of information is useful. And we're going to come back to this one in a minute. So let's have a look at what I mean by that. So let's go back to Visio and let's open another one that I've prepared. This one's quite an interesting one. You've all probably seen diagrams like this inside your organisation. Lots of different objects. The thing that makes these unique, if we just take this one over here, is the either the name of the device or the IP address or something like that. So I'm going to do again a connection, and this time I'm going to connect to some data that we've got from the comms department, which is the here we can see the device names, their IP addresses, and some other stuff. I'm going to automatically link these because I know that most of them will link. So now we can see things like their IP address. But notice that we've got some of these that are active or inactive. So I'm going to take, this is the one I always use, 6830. I'm going to edit the data graphic. I'm going to add a new one. And I'm going to look at the status. And I'm going to do color by value. So if it's active, it's going to be a nice shade of green. If it's inactive, it's going to be a nice shade of red. And I'm going to go OK. And now my diagram, because remember this could be live data, is incredibly useful because it's giving me a really good view on what's going on, in this particular case, on my objects. So hopefully at the moment you're thinking about what data you've got and how you could surface it. I'm trying to show you different things to give you different ideas about it. So if I, just to show the last set of capabilities, if I take this same one, I'm going to edit the data graphic. And I happen to know that we've got an admin, and the admin is about to leave. And so I'm going to say that if the admin equals to B Jones, I think that's how it's spelled, we'll soon see. So if I just zoom in on this, so I can see that where the admin is equal to B Jones, he's leaving. I need to know about this machine and we're going to take control over it or do something. So what you've seen is simple text being displayed. You've seen some progress bars. You've seen colour by value and icons. Now one of the questions I get asked on a regular basis is, can we use our own icons? No, you can't. So, but you can use your own shapes. Because shapes are incredibly easy to manipulate. And I said at the end, I said bring your own. So I'm going to show you something is very simple, or what I'm going to show you is very simple. But actually people pay good money for other tools that Visio will already do. So let us say we want to create a special shape for our business. We have a particular device or something, whatever it is. And it looks quite an interesting shape. So we'll take a square, and then we'll take, I think that's me, but we'll ignore it. Let's switch it off. There we go. So, I would like to have a shape that is something like, let's just move it. It's a bit like taking a segment out of this, an offset segment out of this shape. So at the moment I've got two shapes. How do I do it? Well, one of the hidden features of the developer mode is we have what we call operations, and if I just select those, I go to the operations and I can say fragment. Now what's going to happen is that these elements have been taken away, have been split up. But what I'd like to do is take that shape, invert it, and then we're going to be really artistic here, not. There we go, we're going to take it out of there. So we'll just operations fragments again. There we go. And then this is a really weird shape that we're creating, but it's going to look something like that. So now I'm going to take those, and then with my operations I'm going to create a union, and now I have my new shape, and this is a shape that can be programmed, and you can add all that programmability to it, and you can store this in a library or in a stencil and reuse this. So if you've got particular corporate shapes you want to use, creating them is incredibly easy within that Visio capability. I mean, you do need to have some artistic ability, which obviously I don't have. That's very clear from what I just demoed. But as you can imagine, it's a very, very powerful tool, and that developer tab is definitely worth exploring. So that was the bit on the BYO. Making it nice. How do we make it nice? And what do I mean by size matters? No women in the room. We won't talk about it. That's a British joke as well, but don't worry about it. Okay, so let's go to one of these we have open already. Let's take this one here. Let's just switch off the, let's just take it back to the way. Close that. Switch off the data window. Okay, so the way that I've created this flowchart is actually I used the cross-functional template, which builds me the swim lanes. Those of you who are interested in swim lanes, it builds me the swim lanes. But frankly, I'd like to do something with it, make it look a bit nicer. Already I've used some colours. We've got the thematic colours that we can use to change the look and feel of the diagram. We can do a bit more effects on it, so we can do various stuff. But probably the most important one here is the backgrounds. Because when we do backgrounds, we really lift the diagram off the page. It's much nicer to look at. It presents information. That's probably not the best colour combination I could have chosen. If we look at something more like, let's say, that one. That's much nicer. Now, the important thing to note is here. We've created a background page, and these background pages, you can have various background pages, and of course, because it's a background page, I can do something like your logo. And somewhere this should actually appear. Let's go to the pointer. Make it larger. There we go. So you can create standard backgrounds that you can apply to your diagrams, whether it be logos or anything else that you might want to use. And the diagrams themselves, it's just useful to be aware of. If I come over here, right click, and I look at the page setup, what you can see is that we can choose which background we want to use, but also quite importantly, over here we have layers associated with the page, and we can choose what we want to show, what we want to lock or not lock, as the case may be. Again, an area that is often not used as effectively as it could be. It's extremely powerful. Size matters. When we finish doing the diagram, especially if we wish to publish it to SharePoint, we may have auto-sized the page underneath it. It doesn't really make any difference. But what you want to do is keep the drawing down to the minimum required size. And what you want to do is use this function here, which is fit to drawing. Of course, the logo, it being on a different page, we're going to... that's now moved off there. We'll just move that back to where it wants it to be. All right. So what we've done is we've effectively trimmed the canvas that we're using down to the optimal size for the drawing that we put on there. And that's particularly useful when we publish it to SharePoint. Okay, getting it there. So we talked about having the right SharePoint Enterprise. We've talked about making sure that Visio Services is enabled, because often it's not. We now need to think about data refreshing and what we're going to do. So if we look again at the diagram and we look at the data, we can see that when I go to refresh all, if I go to refresh data instead and go to configure, we can see here that whether or not we wish to automatically refresh the data or whether we want to change the data source. And that's great. However, it's very easy to get confused. This will only refresh data in a Visio diagram. It won't refresh data on Visio Services. The web part we use for Visio Services has its own refresh mechanism associated with it. So it's very easy to get confused between the two. Sometimes you want to use these diagrams on control panels and stuff like that within Visio. But if you want to use Visio Services, you need to understand the difference between the two. So that's that. And what we need to know is, the next thing we need to know is save and send. Now I can tell you when this was in beta, there was a huge internal argument whether this should say save and send or share. Personally, we all prefer share. That's why it's save and send now. Because it's much more obvious. Because save and send is only for one thing, send it as an email. But the reality is pretty well everything else that you'll see on any programs is about using the SharePoint repositories. I'm not going to do this the classic way because I'm using the demo environment, and the classic way is that I link to SharePoint and I'll save it up to SharePoint, but it will take too long if I do that. But what I am going to do is I'm going to save it locally and then upload it. But the most important thing is we've got two now different types of drawing. We have the standard old-fashioned current VSD file, and over here we have the VDW file, web drawing. Now, you can save all your diagrams in the VDW. It doesn't matter. Visio will open a VSD or a VDW in exactly the same way. But the reason why we have a VDW is it adds some additional information to the wrapper to allow SharePoint to understand how to interpret the drawing. So I'm going to save this, actually do it as a save as, and I'm going to save it as a web drawing, which is the VDW. I'm saving it locally onto my Contoso library, and we'll call this Contoso Processing Helsinki, and we'll save that. Now it's warned me that I'm saving it into this sort of server compatible format, but it's saying, well, you know, if you do this, that's fine, but don't forget you're connected to Excel data on your local environment, and therefore if that data changes, because it's in your local environment, it won't change on the server. So it's just an alert to tell me that. Well, I'm happy with that. And so what it's doing now is what it needs to do to convert the diagram ready to be uploaded. And what I will do now is go to the site. I'll go to the process diagrams, and then I'm going to add a new document. Browse, and this Contoso Processing Helsinki. Now the documents I already have in my library, the ones here behind it, are VSD files, so I can open them and edit them in Visio. But this one, because it's a VDW file, it doesn't have that little green splodge. It means that I can preview it now in the browser. So here we go. Take a second because it hasn't done this for a while, so it's going to have to load up the process. There we go. So here we now just have the raw drawing displayed as a Silverlight object in the browser, and the beauty of it is that I can zoom in on these objects, and there's no loss of fidelity because these are vector graphics. They're not bitmaps, and therefore it scales very nicely. Okay, so we've uploaded the diagram, we've connected it. Security. If you're connecting to a server-based data source, whether it's a SharePoint list or a SQL source, Visio or the server will obey the security. If you don't have rights to see that information, you won't see the information. So it's really important that it's all very well us somebody saying create a dashboard, but if the users can't see the data, then you've got a problem. So you need to consider that. We can output from Visio in PNG or in HTML. Okay, so we'll just, last couple of things now before we finish. We'll go back to the browser. We'll go back to the home page here. And so what I'm going to do is add that object onto this page using the web part. So I'm going to go into Site Actions, Edit Page, Standard SharePoint Editing. I don't think we're going to wait for that to go down. Okay, so I'm going to add the web part now, and we'll see that that's in Business Data, Visio Web Access, Add. So now we have the web part on the page. I'm now going to open the tool pane on the right hand side to access it. I can browse to my process diagrams. So that's going to come up and give me a list of them. There we go. We'll pick up the Helsinki one, click OK. So over here now we can choose how frequently. I talked about the refresh of the data. 0 means manually refresh. And then we can choose what options we display, but I'm going to take leave the defaults. I'm going to click OK and stop editing. I've not done really anything to optimize this diagram, but there you go. So I've now put this on the web page in almost no clicks whatsoever. And the great thing now is I can actually use inter-web part connections, so that if I click on one of these objects, if the key links to a list or something else, it will go and do a lookup or a filter based on the value of those shapes. So it's not just a pretty picture. You can link these as HTML URLs to documents that you've got in your document library, to external data sources, or to other web parts that are elsewhere on the page. As you will have seen on the, might have noticed here on the browser, we have a full workflow built into this. And so at the moment this is set to be, I didn't want to do that, this is set to be in draft, so it's not actually visible to the world. So what I can do is go into here and I can I want to improve it. There we go. Let's go to publish a major version. So when I publish it, I've said now this diagram is ready, but it's only gone to pending because it needs approval. It happens to be that I'm the approver as well. So I'm just going to highlight it again. Now it's gone to a pending version, and now when I go to approve it, this is using standard SharePoint workflow. It's now approved and it's moved it on automatically to a new major release, a 1.0 release. Okay, so we've seen most of that. And step 10 is basically summary. Mock it up in Visio. Sit down with your business people, show them what you can do way before you get to SharePoint. Make sure that in Visio your dashboard both has the look and the connection to data that you want to have. Prepare any data before you connect to it. So if you need to do calculations, although you saw in the developer pane in the shape sheet, you can build calculations into your objects. You can get them to calculate on the fly. My view is that you should always, if you can do the calculation in the data and just present it. Enhance the layout. Use backgrounds. Use interesting shapes and shadows and things like that to make it visually more appealing. Test it and tune it. How frequently do you need to update it? Do you want to put in some sort of update flag or some record so that people can see when the data was last updated? One of the things that people very rarely do is tell people when it was last updated. People look at it and say, well, is this current or not? Because we don't normally dynamically update data. Obviously, publish it and make sure people, you inform people, let people know. So many of these initiatives never get really fully appreciated because we don't really push it out to communities. And revisit the layout. Once you've got it up and running, go back to it. It's not finished. It's version 1. Other people will look at it and say, well, if you did this, it'd be a bit better. If you do that, it'd be a bit better. Make it a continuous improvement cycle. With that, it's exactly 1 hour. Whoa, how did you do that? Miracle. So I'll take any questions at this point in time. Well, I am conscious that that door is your doorway to beer. Sure. Have any of you done any stuff with Visio Services? Have you found it good, useful, not?
Yeah.
Yeah? Anything you've seen there that you've not seen before?
Oh, that was pretty basic for me at least. So I've seen everything that you've shown that developer things.
Oh, well, let's see, you haven't seen everything.
Yeah, okay.
So?
Yes, I've seen it. It's nice to see again.
Do you use it internally?
No, I've played around with it, but not in production.
Well, I'd like to see somebody get these things into production. They're very easy to use. Those of you who've got SharePoint Enterprise, you've got all the codes, get on with it. Don't wait, do it. With that, thank you very much. Enjoy the evening.